everyone, Happy New Year and Happy New Queer. Welcome to Charlotte Pride TV. We are so excited to have you here with us tonight and excited for all the virtual activities to come, as well as our in-person activities coming up hopefully soon too. We're still planning for our annual festival and parade on August 21st and 22nd, and we can't wait to see you there. If you follow us on social media, you saw our first preview episode of the Charlotte Pride web show back in October that had a lot of election coverage and had some spotlight on some local organizations doing great work. And tonight, we're kicking off this web show to be an actual monthly program. Tonight's segment, we're really excited to be joined by the fabulous Laura Conner-Hughes, the wonderful Reia Chapman, some of our friends for Wheels for Equality, have our rainbow rundown with the rock star that is James Rice III, and have some special queer slang brought to us by our drag queens friends, Misster and Kristin Collins, as well as so much more. We know that a lot of y'all are having a hard time at home in quarantine. Our team here at Charlotte Pride is too. And this unending frustration of being apart is so difficult, and we hope that Charlotte Pride TV can bring a little sense of togetherness to you in this difficult time. So join in the comments, discuss, ask questions, make friends, make new connections, and if you want to continue expanding those connections, make sure you join our Facebook group, LGBTQ Quarantine, and there you can have even more great conversation with the folks who are watching tonight's TV with you. Also want to say a special thank you to our sponsors and our partners for helping support our work and our programmings. Big shout out to our visionary sponsor Truist for joining us for the very first time in 2020. And without further ado, we hope you enjoy tonight's web show and that you find some sense of community with the wonderful programming and great folks that we have with us tonight. Have a wonderful evening and enjoy the show.
What's up, everyone? My name is James Rice III, but you can call me JR3. Welcome to the first episode of our relaunched Charlotte Pride TV. Back in October, we did a test run of the show and got a bunch of positive feedback from you, our viewers, so we're back and better than ever. I have the honor of joining you at the top of each edition of Charlotte Pride TV with a segment we call the Rainbow Rundown, a collection of the top news stories impacting the LGBTQ community here at home and abroad in the past 30 days. So are you ready? Get set. Let's run. Our top story is the inauguration of Joe Biden as our 46th president and Kamala Harris as our history-making vice president. Vice President Harris is our first Black, South Asian, and female vice president in American history. The new administration has hit the ground running, with President Biden issuing 17 executive orders in his first day in office, including an order which directs federal agencies to implement historic LGBTQ protections in the employment sector, education, housing, and more. In addition, the White House's contact form on its website has been updated to include visitors' preferred pronouns, a small but visible step in support of the LGBTQ community. Biden's orders also include a national vaccination strategy and a federal mask mandate. Speaking of COVID and masks, this is a reminder from all of us at Charlotte Pride. Mask up, mask up, mask up. We are still experiencing some of our highest COVID infection rates, hospitalizations, and deaths. We want you to be safe, healthy, and happy. So remember to stay at home if you can, wash your hands, and if you have to leave your house, mask up. Turning now to local news, the statewide ban against local LGBTQ non-discrimination ordinances is over. Several towns like Durham and Chapel Hill have already passed protections, while places like Winston-Salem and Boone have announced they are holding votes on their ordinances soon. Equality North Carolina and the Campaign for Southern Equality are leading the statewide effort to pass local protections, but the work is far from over, especially regarding transgender protections. Advocates say the state needs to repeal anti-trans measures. They have also been urging Congress to pass the Federal Equality Act. And as we wind down the rundown this month, we want to acknowledge some big changes for local LGBTQ leaders. At the end of last year, longtime RAIN president and founder Debbie Warren announced her retirement after 30 years at the helm of the landmark HIV and AIDS service organization. Stepping into Reign's executive post is longtime employee Chelsea Golden. Lainey Millen, a longtime associate editor and production director of Q Notes, announced her retirement in January. Lainey had worked at Q Notes for 20 years. And finally, Chad Turner, the board chair of Charlotte LGBT Chamber, was hired as that organization's very first employee. He'll serve as executive director. As we end our segment this month, let me remind you to log on to Charlotte Pride blog every Friday for a weekly Rainbow Rundown of recent news. The weekly Rainbow Rundown will have its New Year reboot on January 29th. Don't forget that you can also still read Charlotte Pride's limited edition magazine recapping the events of 2020. Find those web links on your screen right now. Until next month, friends, please take care, be safe, and mask up.
Hello there. We are so glad to have you for this Charlotte Pride monthly web show, and we're really excited to bring you a special interview this month. I'm joined today by Reia Chapman, who is a social worker, an activist, and an all-around incredible person. So really excited to have her here with us tonight. Hi, Reia. How are you doing?
Hi. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much.
Yes, we are glad to have you. Really excited to dig into the work that you do, hear more about it, hear how we can help support the work that you do, and then also want to talk a little bit about how to take care of your mental health in all of the wild times we're currently having and the wild times that our LGBTQ family always is facing. So to kick us off, talk to me a little bit about who you are and what you do. Pretend it's the first time you've ever met someone. What are those things that you want to make sure somebody takes away from that interaction?
Sure. Well, you mentioned that I am a social worker, which is true. Many people know me as the clinician, the owner, and founder of the Center for Family and Maternal Wellness, which is a private practice that I founded in 2016, specifically in response to the need for more representation of Black and Brown, queer and trans, and gender nonconforming identified clinicians. And so super proud of that work. We will actually be turning 5 years old in March. I can't even
Happy
believe
birthday.
that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And in a lot of ways, I bring the profession of social work to different spaces. And so I like to tell people that I work at the intersection of social work and social justice work, because the other probably well-known identity is just being in activism spaces. And so for close to 20 years, I've been doing a lot of mental health accessibility, healthcare reform, police accountability, decarcerated mental health response, which is the work that I do with the Social Justice Emotional Response Collective that I founded also in 2016 in response to the murder of Keith Lamont Scott. And again, just recognizing that in crisis situations, when there is community instability, that there are some people who are the most likely to be impacted by that. And again, you know, Black and Brown folks, queer and trans identified folks, Indigenous folks, houseless folks, people who are underinsured or uninsured, things like that. It's like, how do we provide accessibility to people in times of crisis, but also, you know, how do we do that without risking greater harm to them, which is why we use a decarcerated model of crisis response.
So just a few incredible things. I'm sure our viewers are going, oh my goodness, what a resume. I love the idea of the intersection of social justice and social work. They are two things that can't happen without one another. There are many narratives around social work that kind of enact that white savior mentality, and really approaching from that thoughtful, intentional social justice lens can help make sure that we're actually serving folks in that space. You mentioned there at the end the founding of the Social Justice Emotional Response Collective. Can you tell me a little bit more about exactly what the work is that you do through that group and how folks can support that?
Sure, of course. So back in 2016, I was social working in Alaska. Long story shorter, I loved it. But while I was there,
Mm-hmm.
Charlotte uprising happened, right? The uprising happened. And I remember very, very clearly kind of going back to 2014 when I was organizing the National Moment of Silence in Charlotte after another murder. Of an unarmed Black kid, and so Michael Brown, folks may recall that the organizing that was happening there, and I remember watching kind of Ferguson unfold on national TV. And as a clinician, I am always going to be attuned to what human behaviors are present, but also what are our behavior responses to trauma. And I'm not that old, but I've never, recalled being in a situation where I saw gross militarization of entire communities where there were, flashbangs and tear gas and tanks and dogs just being deployed onto a domestic community. It was like a war zone. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember at that time thinking like we have to do something. And so I remember even contacting a local chapter of the National Association of Social Workers in the Ferguson, Missouri area and sending an email to them saying, "Hey, I can organize a contingency of social workers to come and to offer pro bono support to be of service because obviously it's going to be needed." And I got an email back that said, "We don't have a problem here. There's nothing going on in our community." Yeah. And I was floored. Really,
Oh
I
my
was both
God.
shocked. And I think I was disheartened,
Yeah.
really, to be a part of a profession that really at, claims to advocate for the most marginalized, and that really charges social workers to be advocates for justice and for what is right. And so I had, previous organizing history, in the reproductive justice movement and getting large groups of people together. And so it's what I know how to do is
Mhm.
organize. So, that moment came and went, if you will. And when 2016 happened, I was like, I'll not wait for someone to come and serve us. I will create the opportunity for folks to access the support they needed. And so at that time, we organized under the Charlotte Emotional Response Team. There was also a Charlotte Uprising Emotional Response Team collective. So there were kind of iterations of this entity that really comprised of myself and other clinicians, not just in North Carolina, but across the country. It was over 100 people who were willing to give their time, their resources, their office spaces, their technology to make sure that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, anybody who was on the ground, anybody who was a part of the community who was being impacted by the uprising could access mental health support without having to worry about money.
Mhm.
So I was super proud of that. And today, um, like we're still here. We've formed a tighter organization, and so we do have a website. You can check us out at the number 4sj.org. And then we still have clinicians who volunteer with us. We focused our attention in quieter times, the lull of not actively responding to crisis, in terms of
Mhm.
education and figuring out ways to change what crisis response service delivery looks like, first in Mecklenburg County, but also as a model for other states. And so we do get calls from Florida and from Georgia and from other places. Like, how do we replicate this? How do we create that? We have a Greensboro chapter of SJERC, which is a new development in 2020. And so we just move forward. We push forward in the work, always learning, always striving to be better, recognizing the privilege that we as clinicians have, and that there is an acknowledgement, I think, that all of us have been trained and educated in a policed state, that most of us are all of us are trained that when there's an emergency, particularly or even a mental health emergency, to call the police. And we've also, learned that that's deadly. That's a deadly decision,
Yep.
to make oftentimes. And so we're trying to be better.
Nice. Thank you for sharing more about that and the incredible, I'm probably going to say incredible work that you do 5 or 6 times at least, but it really is. And it's so important to find this way that we can respond with our skill sets to help serve those around us. So I love that. So I want to take a little bit of a shift and go a little bit more to how we can help uplift those watching this segment right now. As we move into a new year, there's already a lot of challenges and obstacles. I've seen a couple people phrase it as, oh, it's March 307th or December 38th, 2020. And a lot of this is just continuing to re-exacerbate trauma, particularly for our Black and Brown and trans and gender nonconforming siblings. What advice do you have for our community for taking care of their own mental health and trying to avoid that all too easy to fall into habit of doom scrolling and just feeling like everything is on their shoulders?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. It's so important. I think it's a question that lots more people are starting to ponder after the year that we've had. And to your point, it really seems like it hasn't been a year. It just seems like it's been 10 years or something. It's like it feels like so much was crammed into 2020 that I even found myself at times struggling to recall like when historical things have occurred. I was like, was that this year that I went there? Or I can't remember, But something that I often teach people or, express is really identifying where the source of stress comes from, the source of anxiety, the source of sadness is coming from. And because we're all overly exposed in general, then it becomes a lot more challenging to kind of pull back and disconnect and to spend some time just being self-aware or just developing your level of consciousness when it comes to yourself. Many people are operating on autopilot as a form of, both rational and irrational coping. And I think that really taking a step back and recognizing, what is actually causing me distress? Is it, how much technology I'm using? Is it how much social media I'm consuming? Is it this particular type of social media that I'm consuming? Being aware of your basic biological needs and the fluctuations in that. So, on average, how many hours am I sleeping? And does it feel like it's enough? How well am I hydrated? And how do I know that? Right. In my longer trainings and workshops, I kind of talk about, people laugh. It's like, well, what color is your pee and what does it smell like? Because that is a telltale sign. Your body will tell you. Like if you look down there in that toilet and this bag on there orange, you are not well hydrated. If it smells like death, you are not well hydrated. Like these are signs. And sometimes when we're so busy, and so consumed, we're available to everyone else and everything else but ourselves. We ignore things that should be obvious, like what's coming out of our bodies, when you think about it. And if you don't know, it's a sign, to reconnect with yourself. So that's what I would say.
Okay, thank you. So keep an eye on what your pee smells like is the summary of how to take care of your mental health. Well, we're coming up to the end of the segment, but kind of last question for you is very open-ended. Any final words you want to share with our audience?
Yeah, for sure. Like, definitely grant yourself some grace. I think a lot of people were kind of putting out there in 2020 and quarantine, like, if you're not coming out with a new book, or if you're not coming out with, a better brand, or if you're not side hustling to the 10th degree, that you've wasted, this opportunity to be at home if you have the privilege of doing so. And I just reject that, that in so many ways, even before quarantine, it's go, 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 do, and always having to be on. And sometimes the best gift that we can give ourselves is rest and to disconnect and to not feel guilty about that. Because you're able to be your best self, your most creative self, your most attentive, healthy, and whole self when your body is well taken care of. And so, again, don't forget about yourself and all you're doing. Pay attention to yourself. Surround yourself with people who are great mirrors for you, not people that are just going to co-sign everything that you're doing. Like, it's good to have some balance and someone to kind of say, hey, like, I'm noticing, you've been a little different, for the past couple of days or the past couple of weeks or so. And to really like refocus some of your energy onto taking care of yourself.
Fabulous. Well, Reia, thank you so much. I feel like I have had my own little therapy session in this conversation with you. So I appreciate all of your thoughtful time and the intention that you brought to this space. Last question, bonus to the previous. How can people best support you and your organizations?
Sure. So again, on our website, esforsj.org, if you want to support our crisis response work, there are some links on there to, I think, PayPal, Venmo, the other one, Cash App or something. Yeah, there's another one on there. I can't keep up with like all the apps. So you can send a message to us directly if you want to make like larger donations. Sometimes people do that because the apps don't support it. You can outreach me at Reia, REIA, at cfmwellness.com for questions about our work, ways to send donations to us. We do accept checks, cash, like I said, apps and things like that. If you want to volunteer or if you want to support our work in non-monetary ways, there's a volunteer link on our website as well. And we're actually looking for interns and volunteers for this year. So we're excited to offer that in 2021.
Fantastic. Wow. So make sure you go do some of those things and work to help uplift the incredible work that the Social Justice Emotional Response Collective and Reia are doing. Again, thank you for spending time with me today, and hope you enjoy the rest of the web show this month. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Hi there, Kristin Collins, Miss Charlotte Pride 2018. Since the 1980s, HIV and AIDS have had a place at all discussions surrounding our LGBTQ community, particularly for men who have sex with men, but it's something we all need to ensure we are aware of. For a long time, HIV was regarded as something that left someone ostracized and misunderstood, but thankfully, with the advent of treatments and preventatives, we've seen worlds of progress. One of the most important terms developed has been undetectable. An undetectable viral load is where the antiretroviral treatment, the medical treatment for HIV, has reduced the virus to such small quantities that it can no longer be detected by standard blood test. People living with HIV who have an undetectable viral load cannot pass HIV through sex. The most important thing we can do is all learn our status, get treatment, or use preventatives to ensure an AIDS-free future.
Well, hey there, I'm Misster, and today I want to tell you about some queer words and slang that you should know. There are so many words that we can learn to be better allies for our transgender community. Often, when we talk about trans folks, there's a lot of focus on the question, what gender were you born as? And although this is normally a well-intended question, it actually has some very malicious roots, because this is pushing for information a trans person may not feel comfortable sharing with you, especially in a public setting. One component of this question we want to break down today is the phrase sex assigned at birth. This is the most accurate way to refer to the sex that someone was given to at birth based off the discernment of an infant's physical sexual characteristics. For a trans person, their sex assigned at birth is different from their current gender identity, while for a cisgender person, their sex assigned at birth and gender identity both align. You may also hear trans people use some acronyms to refer to their sex birth. If you hear AMAB, that means assigned male at birth, while AFAB means assigned female at birth. The best tip to keep in mind is that unless a trans person wants to tell you about their sex assigned at birth, it really isn't something for you to worry about. Just treat people as people.
Hi, my name is Nada. I am the programs manager for Charlotte Pride, and this is Queer Complexities. So Queer Complexities is a web show segment in the Charlotte Pride web show that revolves around discussing discourse and concepts that exist in the LGBTQ community that may be complex or difficult to understand for folks who are entering this space newly or just have difficult times understanding concepts that are like talked about very widely, but can sometimes be very difficult to get to the core of. So today we have Laura from Transcend. Laura Conner-Hughes is an incredible organizer, and Transcend is an organization that advocates for equity and access to resources for trans folks in Charlotte. So Laura, if you feel safe and comfortable, please take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Nada. And thanks for having me on the web show today. I'm really excited to talk about neopronouns. I think it is something that a lot of folks get confused by since we're not taught this from the same age as we're taught English and other things. So I'm really excited to get started. All right. As Nada said, my name is Laura Conner-Hughes. My pronouns are they, she, and let's get started with the presentation. All right. So first things first, what are pronouns? So I will say today we are specifically talking about pronouns, third person personal pronouns in the English language. These words and rules don't apply to all languages and can vary by dialect, region, culture, and more. So just want to get that out there. Pronouns are words that we use to replace nouns, like a person's name in a sentence, to refer to that thing without having to say the proper name of it over and over again. They are used by all English speakers, and it is often part of how people describe and express their gender identity, which is their personal sense of gender. And it is not a reflection of gender expression, the physical interpretation, what we see on the outside. So pronouns are really important. First of all, because language is important. Language is one of the ways most people understand and relate to society and the world, and how most people express their feelings, ideas, needs, and wants. Pronouns are valid and important components of the language and are to be respected and used according to an individual's discretion. Pronouns have no inherent bearing on sexual or romantic orientation, assigned sex at birth, gender expression, or any other aspect of identity. And pronouns are often used to either affirm and, unfortunately, sometimes to deny a person's gender identity. So neopronouns are sets of pronouns that exist outside of the officially recognized language or English language. Historically, they've been created by trans, non-binary, and gender expansive folks to address the limited pronoun options that we have in English. And they serve to represent identities that fall outside mainstream recognition of gender, typically the gender binary. It also really demonstrates the resiliency and creativity of our community and how they can find language that expresses who they are and how they want to be seen in the world without the need of official English language. So real quick history lesson for those who don't know, neopronouns actually date back to 1375, specifically the singular they. Actually, the singular they is older than the singular you, which is pretty interesting as well, since typically now we think of it opposite, where it's supposed to be only singular you and then plural they. You can find singular they pronouns in the works of Chaucer, Shakespeare, Austen, and many more. Language often exists long before it is officially recognized in the lexicon. If you think back to words that we use every day, like y'all, for instance, y'all was not officially recognized in the English language until many, many years after it had started being used. Same with terms like computer. If you went back to 1865 and you said the word computer, no one's going to have any idea what you're talking about because the word did not exist back then. Language is always evolving. New words are always being created and used to express ourselves, to express our needs, wants, things like that in the world. And we actually use the singular they all the time. We just typically don't think about it. I have some examples over here like, oh, someone left their hat. When will they call? Where did they go? When you use the singular they, you're referring to somebody whose gender is not immediately known, which is something that a lot of folks who are very interested in grammar are very steadfast in traditional grammar are used to battling with when it comes to neopronouns. It's saying, well, singular they doesn't exist, it's not grammatically correct. But as you can see from this quick history lesson we're doing, it actually really is. I would also like to say that an authority's recognition of a word does not mean that the word was invalid before that authority recognized it. It's just that recognition tends to get things put into dictionaries, tends to make them more mainstream and less niche language. One other thing I'd like to note is that anybody of any gender identity can use any pronoun they would like to. You do not have to be trans, NB, or gender expansive to use singular they or neopronouns. You do not have to be cisgender to use binary pronouns. You don't have to be in the binary to use binary pronouns, and you do not have to be outside of the binary to use pronouns that are typically found outside of the binary. All right, so one thing I would like to touch on before we get started are common excuses that I hear a lot when I talk to folks about pronoun usage. First of all, or the first most important one, not more important, excuse me, the one I hear most commonly is that those pronouns aren't grammatically correct. Yes, they are. And who cares if they're grammatically correct? Grammar is a social construct. It's something that we invent and create on our own and we have decided upon as a society. And it's often been used to dismiss and belittle people, particularly in academia and professional settings. If you can understand what a person is trying to say, then it doesn't really matter what grammar structure that they use. Simply that, and also simply that grammar cannot be hurt. Grammar cannot be misgendered. Grammar cannot have their feelings hurt. It's not a sentient being. People can, though. So that's something to keep in mind. It makes me uncomfortable to use these pronouns. I hear that a lot as well, especially if it's something new. Often new things are uncomfortable at first, especially if we're learning and we make mistakes. But whatever discomfort you might feel about using a person's pronouns is nothing compared to this discomfort of being misgendered. That is far more uncomfortable to not be seen and validated in the world. I would also ask yourself, why does it make you feel uncomfortable to affirm somebody else's identity? I don't know how to use these pronouns. That is a very common one as well. Guess what? When I first started doing this work, I didn't understand how to use these pronouns either. Everyone who uses neopronouns or pronouns outside of the typical gender binary thought of pronouns had to be taught how to do it. And in that teaching, you have to learn and you have to make mistakes and you have to be corrected. It's never too late to learn how to use them. No one has ever corrected me, so I must have never misgendered someone. So that's untrue. People do not correct others for misgendering them for a variety of reasons. The number one being safety. If someone does not feel safe in asserting their pronouns or their gender identity to somebody, that typically speaks more to the situation that they're in or the person that they're speaking to. Again, I would ask yourself, why do you think a person wouldn't feel safe correcting you? Because I can tell you, anybody watching this, including me, myself presenting this, has misgendered folks, whether we knew that we did or not. I don't care is one I've heard before. As I say, dismiss anyone who uses this excuse from your life immediately. They're not someone you want to align yourself with. Just because something is not important to you personally does not mean that it is not important or valid to other people. And this particular sentiment really gets on me for that. It doesn't matter if you don't use neopronouns. If someone else does, that should be enough to use them. I don't know anyone like that. You absolutely do. Every single one of us does know a trans or non-binary or gender expansive person, whether we know it or not. Case in point, there are folks who come out well into their adulthood who have been trans their entire lives, or have been non-binary their entire lives. But until they come out, we don't know. But those folks are still trans even when they're not out, if that makes sense. Last one, which is, I think, the worst one. I don't believe in transgender people, and I will tell you to stop it. Trans people are not an idea. We are not a concept. We're not the Easter Bunny. We're not Santa Claus. What you're really saying is that you don't value and respect trans people, and that is a way bigger problem, because whether or not you believe in something doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, and doesn't mean that it isn't prevalent. So that's my little soapbox for that. We're going to move right along to some pronoun examples. One thing I would like to bring up front, if someone tells you what pronouns they use those pronouns. Do your absolute best to use those pronouns. If you don't know how to use those pronouns, you can always ask somebody. You can also Google it. There are plenty of resources online that can help walk you through how to learn pronouns or use a person's pronouns. And really the best way is to just practice, practice, practice. Also, one other note, I've heard some people use the term preferred pronouns when talking about these things. I'd like to take a second and just say that a person's pronouns are not their preferred pronouns. They are their pronouns. The term preferred really denotes the idea of choice. Like, yeah, these are the pronouns I wish you would use, but if you don't, it's okay. That's not what we're talking about here. A person's pronouns are their pronouns are their pronouns. Point blank, full stop. So, officially recognized pronoun examples. These are the ones we are most familiar with, I believe. She, her, hers, herself, which are typically feminine, and he, him, his, himself, which are typically masculine. Those are what we call the binary pronouns, the ones that fit into those two boxes of male or female. As I said earlier, someone using these pronouns does not mean they identify as either male or female. It doesn't mean that they're in the binary. So just keep that in mind. It's completely separate from gender identity. They, them, their, theirs, themselves. Those are the ones I think of the neopronouns that folks are most aware of, especially because when I believe it was Merriam-Webster added the singular they back officially into the lexicon about a year or so ago, which is something we've been telling you all along. You know, they, them, theirs, the singular they is grammatically correct. You can use it. It is valid. And that particular moment of them officially putting it back in the lexicon really helped dissolve any arguments of it's not grammatically correct, or, you know, you can only use they in a plural sense. And this is also where a lot of people get hung up on grammar, because they can be used as plural pronouns. So yeah, some of the examples just to give you an idea of what they look like. She went to get her bag. He left his pen on my desk. They aren't wearing their coat. And also they are studying by themselves. That's something that I think would hang somebody or get somebody hung up on grammar, is that when you typically use the word are, it refers to more than one person. In this sense, technically, yes. And I think it's really to help folks understand, because if someone were to say they is studying by themselves, that typically sets off way more grammar alarm bells for folks than anything. So in these cases, the word are can be used interchangeably. However, saying they is would still be correct, because especially if you're talking about one single person. So here we go to neopronouns. Now, I will say the neopronouns I'm sharing with you today are not an exhaustive list, because there is no exhaustive list. New pronouns are being developed and used every day, all the time. There are a lot of these that I'm going to go through that actually have really cropped up in the past 5-6 years. And there are more being, like I said, created all the time. These are just some of the more common ones that you might run across. So Z, here, and here self. So like I said, they sound like Z and here, It is similar to the way we would use she, her pronouns grammatically. So as you can see, Z went to get here bag. I listened to hear. Z left Zier pen on my desk. There is Zier's car. Things like that. It can feel a little strange at first, especially if you are not accustomed to using these pronouns. This is where that practice comes in, where you continually try and use it, and be okay with messing up, be okay with getting it wrong, and be okay with getting corrected. Because once you start using them, it will eventually become second nature the more you practice. And as you can see, they're broken up into 3 separate ones here, because there are different ways or different spellings of these. Some to combat the confusion of how to pronounce them. Some folks have a hard time understanding how to pronounce here, because it doesn't look like the typical way we are used to hearing that word spelled or seeing that word spelled, which is why Z, Zier, Ziers, and Zier self is also a really common one. They're typically similar. They're similar in grammatical structure. It's just a way of helping with the confusion of pronouncing here. So yeah, Z left Zier pen on my desk. There is Zier's car. Z is studying by Zier self. The one in red there is also Z, Zem, and rhymes with air, so Zer. So Z, Zem, Zer, Zers, and Zer self. Excuse me. It's similar to the way we use they, them grammatically, but you notice here in this last example in the red, after the Z is studying by themself, I switched out R for is, because in that moment it sounds better to folks' ears to hear the Z is instead of ZR. It's really just to help not have as much confusion when using these. Some other pronouns that are neopronouns are called noun self pronouns. So noun self pronouns are sets of pronouns that are based off a specific word and that are used interchangeably with other pronouns or typical pronouns. So here, these are 2 of the most popular that come across: fey, fair, fairs, and fair self. Sounds like fey and fair. It's based off of the word fairy. Fey went to get fair bag. I listened to fair. Fey is studying by fair self. Similar with bun, or bun, buns, and bun self, based off the word bunny. So Bun left Bun's pen on my desk. There is Bun's car. And Bun is studying by Bun self. So someone who uses noun self pronouns, it is typically best to ask them how to use their pronouns properly, because it can be more difficult if you're used to the more traditional or more common pronouns like they, them, their, he, him, her, he, him, his, she, her, hers. These types of pronouns can feel grammatically strange, but they're just as valid as any other pronoun set. And if someone tells you these are the pronouns that they use, you should do your best to use them, even if it does feel a little uncomfortable, and even if you do get it wrong sometimes. So non-standard pronouns is another one to go through. These are not strictly neopronouns because they are used in the English language pretty often, but are usually used to refer to subjects instead of nouns or people. They're also not officially recognized as personal pronouns in the lexicon, though they are often used as personal pronouns. The first one being it, its, and itself. This one can be somewhat controversial because sometimes these pronouns are used to dehumanize and devalue trans and being gender expansive folks. I highly recommend that you only use this set of pronouns for folks who tell you that those are the pronouns that are used. But to give you an example, it went to get its bag. I listened to it. It is studying by itself. And there's also one, ones, and oneself. You'll hear this often in formal speech as well. Sometimes it's used as an alternative for a singular they, but one isn't wearing one's coat, give one a break, or one is studying by oneself. Another one I'd like to point out is alternating pronouns. This is one that can really confuse some folks, especially if they are new to neopronouns and how to use them. It means that someone uses it has the use of two or more pronouns interchangeably in this. It can be in the same sentence, it can be in the same paragraph. As you noticed at the beginning, my pronouns are they, them, their, or she, her, hers. So regardless of what order you use those two pronouns, if you use one of those two sets or both sets at the same time, that's the pronouns that I use. Those are my pronouns. If you were to use pronouns outside of that set that I've given you, then you would be misgendering me. But for example, someone can use she, he, and they pronouns, or all pronouns. And then, yeah, it can be confusing when you're trying to speak using these. A lot of times people will stick to whatever pronoun they start off with. So if they start using she, they stick with she. They start using he, they stick with he when they're referring to somebody. By the way, I shouldn't make clear. Referring to someone who uses alternating pronouns. Which typically is okay. Most folks usually don't mind, but it's just something to be aware of since we're talking about new neopronouns. The confusion that folks feel as well can often be mitigated by restructuring sentences or using a person's name. So like if I said, she went to get his bag, I'm talking about the same person. And because that person uses both she and he pronouns, both of those pronouns are correct for them. Even them would be correct too in this example. I listen to them, same. I listen to her, I listen to him, I listen to them. If you can be talking about the same person. And they are studying by herself. That can be confusing because especially we have a tendency to think that if someone uses a certain set of pronouns, those are the only pronouns they use, which is why I think it's important to highlight these alternating pronouns. Because a lot of folks, this is what makes them most comfortable. This is an interesting one as well. No pronouns, pronoun dropping, or pronounless. This is one you don't see quite as much often as other pronoun sets and other neopronouns, but there are folks who do not use pronouns at all. They would ask that you only refer to the person using the person's name. So in this case, a person is named Sam. You might need to restructure your sentences to make your point clear. You might stumble a bit when speaking, especially if you're used to using pronouns like I just did there in that example. But it is something that can be practiced, and it's something that a lot of folks have been coming around to, starting to use. It's becoming more and more popular and more common. So Sam went to get Sam's bag. If we're talking about Sam, we wouldn't use any other pronouns to refer to Sam. We would only use Sam's name. I listened to Sam. Sam is studying on Sam's own. You'll notice the difference in that example than the ones previously, where instead of, because saying Sam self doesn't quite get the point across. It sounds a little clunky. It's difficult to say, difficult to understand for some folks. So you just restructure the sentence or restructure the way you're going to say what you're going to say. All right. So now that we've gone over some of the pronouns, neopronouns, noun self, alternating pronouns, and pronoun dropping, we're getting to one of my favorite parts. Help, I misgendered somebody. What do I do? One thing that I have definitely noticed in my work with this community, and something I honestly faced myself when I first started working, was the preoccupation of accidentally misgendering somebody. To the point where I would sometimes not be able to fully connect with the person one-on-one because I was too busy up here, instead of listening to them, worrying about what pronoun I was going to use the next time I said something. That isn't helpful for anyone. That puts a barrier between you and that person. It puts a barrier between your ability to connect with them, to authentically interact with them. And while it is sometimes a nervousness reaction, it's something to work on. But say you misgender somebody. First thing to do is to take a breath. Breathe. Accidentally misgendering somebody does not make you a bad person. It makes you human. Humans make mistakes. I've been doing this work for over 3 years now. I misgender people all the time. It happens, especially if I'm not concentrating on it, if I'm speaking very quickly or trying to get points across very quickly. It happens. One thing I would urge you to do in this instance is resist the urge to make it about you, and there'll be more on that in a second. I will also say, while accidentally misgendering a person doesn't make you a bad person, intentionally misgendering somebody does. That intentional misgendering of a person is very disrespectful and is very harmful. And if that is something that happens in your experience with other folks, I would really take some time to look in on that and work on that as to why weaponizing pronouns is something you would use. So, back to the example. You misgender somebody, you take a breath, you realize, I did it. Okay, what do I do next? You correct yourself. If you know the person's pronouns and you can correct yourself in the moment, you can literally just do it like that. Like, say I'm talking with someone and I'm going to tell him to go over there. It's that quick. If someone corrects you on the pronouns, acknowledge that you've been corrected. Do correct yourself. Do take a moment to thank someone if they correct you. Don't force the person who corrected you into forgiving you for misgendering. And typically that's done by saying, oh, I'm sorry. Part of our social contract pressures folks into saying things like, it's okay, no problem, don't worry about it, if somebody apologizes to us. Misgendered people are not required to forgive you. They can if they want to. But putting them in a situation where they feel like they have to or do it out of the social contract or out of a knee-jerk reaction isn't the best way to go about it. And the way that you combat that is by if someone corrects you, simply thank them. So if I'm talking to somebody, I use the wrong pronoun, they tell me what pronoun they actually use, I say, oh, thank you. Continue using the pronoun that they use and move on. That's number 3. Move on. Don't dwell on it. Keep it moving. Do not bring attention to it. Don't make it a thing. You know it happened. The person you misgendered knows it happened. And outside of those 2 people, other folks may not have even realized. And bringing more attention to it can be really difficult and can be embarrassing. It can be triggering for folks as well. So in the moment, it does. Even if you feel super horrible and you just want to apologize and fall on yourself, groveling for forgiveness, don't do it, because it's not about you. It's about them. And making a big deal of it will bring more attention to it than most people will catch on to. Another thing to do is, if you find yourself continuously using the wrong pronouns for a person, is commit to practicing using that person's pronoun. Sometimes it can be if you just talk to yourself in the mirror. If you're in your head thinking about them, make sure that you're using the correct pronouns for them. And if you find yourself using the wrong pronouns even when you're not speaking out loud, correct yourself in your head. It's the best way to get the practice. The last thing I like to say about this is that it is effort over perfection. Perfection doesn't exist here. Like I said, folks misgender folks all the time. I do it all the time. And the perfection isn't important. It's the effort that's important. Because a lot of times folks, if they see that you are making the effort by correcting yourself, by thanking them for correcting you, by practicing their pronouns and doing your best without calling attention to how much you're trying and what you're trying to do, that can really help the situation. And these are some resources if you'd like some more information. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. There are the Transcend Charlotte. There are the number you can reach us, my email address, our website, Timeout Youth, PFLAG Charlotte, and then also some resources for like mypronouns.org, the Transgender Training Institute. There's a lot of really great resources out there for pronouns.
Thank you so much for that incredible presentation, Laura. And I appreciate you for your time and for the labor that you put into this. If anyone in the comments has any questions, please leave them in the comments and we'll try to answer them ourselves or just try to redirect you to the best resource to get that comment answered. Please enjoy the rest of the web show and the other incredible segments that we have lined up for y'all.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Welcome to this episode's spotlight on local Charlotte LGBTQ history. I'm standing here today in front of the old Varnadore Building. You may see it when you drive down Independence Boulevard, going in and out of town or visiting the Walmart across the street. It doesn't look like much today, But believe it or not, more than 10 years ago, this was a hub for the Charlotte LGBTQ community. Right up there on the 5th floor corner, I even had an office.
Built in the early 1960s, the old Varnadore Building was originally constructed by Charles Irvin, a prolific real estate developer. Featuring interior walls that could be moved to allow for differing office configurations, the 7-story building was the first office tower built outside of Uptown and a point of pride for East Charlotte. Flash forward nearly 30 years, and by the 1990s, a new owner had changed the name to Varnadore, and the building became a hotspot for local LGBTQ community groups and businesses. Time Out Youth once had offices here, long before they moved into their current building on Monroe Road. Out Charlotte, a local LGBTQ arts and culture festival that ran from the mid-90s to the early 2000s, also had offices in the Varnadore Building. Among the earliest queer groups to move in was the Metropolitan Community Church of Charlotte, which also lent out its space for a variety of support groups and services, including AA meetings and HIV testing. That old 5th floor office I mentioned at the top of the segment, well, that belonged to another longtime tenant, our city's LGBTQ newspaper, Q Notes. I moved into that corner office when I became editor in 2007, just 2 years before Q Notes became the last tenant to leave, as the building was shuttered for good. The Varnadore has been sitting empty ever since, and its age is certainly showing with the building exposed to all sorts of weather and damage. But one local developer may bring this East Charlotte landmark back to life. As of July 2020, G-Vest Capital has secured funding and rezoning to turn the Varnadore and a neighboring property into a community-oriented business hub, complete with a grocery garden, community engagement spaces, retail, offices, and a business incubator. The property may also eventually be home to a restaurant or cafe and a health and wellness center. Personally, I hope the Varnadore gets a new lease on life. I'd love to see my old workplace and a space so integral to Charlotte's queer history come alive again with a new hustle and bustle. Perhaps even a whole new crop of queer entrepreneurs and nonprofits may find a home again in the Varnadore Building someday. Thanks for taking a trip down memory lane with me today. I hope you'll tune in again to next month's Charlotte Pride TV, when, as always, we'll step back into time and learn a bit more about Charlotte's LGBTQ history.
Karma. My pronouns are she, her, and I mean basically I just support and ride out with Wheels for Equality.
My name is Johnny. My pronouns is he, him, and my G, and my position at Wheels for Equality is the president. Wheels for Equality, in my estimation, is a group that came and band together to protect the First Amendment rights of all the protesters that came out there. We wanted to make sure that we was the front line support for y'all. Since the cops had their bike cops, we was gonna be the bike cops for them and everything. And we wasn't gonna let anybody come through or with the protesting coming through the downtown as much as possible as we could.
Since the cops, like Johnny said, have, their form of trying to so-called corral us, we decided that we would make sure that we could keep ourselves safe against their corral. And I mean, we're just here to support everyone that is down for the same cause that we're down for, no matter, what the standards are. We keep us safe.
We keep us safe?
Yeah, we keep us safe. Just for me personally, being not just black, because that's what started it, a black man, that's what really set the world on fire. A black man was assaulted by people that actually, signed the oath to take care of him and protect him and serve him. So not just me being black, but me being queer as well, it made me realize that we also have the same issues in that community as well. And if, regardless of whether, because I mean, in all honesty, we do have those issues in the Black community where queer people aren't, fully accepted. If I can be that person to be there, and no matter who you are, what you identify as, or how you feel, on the inside and what you look like on the outside, if I can be that person to be there for you and let you know that, I mean, none of that shit matters. Tell me what's up and how you want me to address you, and we can, figure it out. But my point is, we agree, and we trying to make a change, and we're supposed to keep each other safe. And that's just what it is. So it was just, people don't think like that, and sometimes people just need somebody to be like, you know what, yeah, I feel the same way.
I feel like it's my duty to sit there and make sure that I live what I go by, because I'll be a hypocrite to sit there and say that Black Lives Matter, then they ain't gonna sit there and support the LGBTQ community as well. For people that want us to sit there and educate the youth and everything, I want them to sit there and venture out of their communities and everything. And the way that we get people to venture out their communities and do different things is by donating to us so we can get bikes or roller skates and teaching them life lessons on roller skates, and basically like look out for traffic or anything. Just teaching them, and once you fall down, always get back up. That's a life lesson that you can always carry on and in the future, for just like never stopping, or if you want to get better at something, you always keep on practicing, repetition. And it's just a mentoring program that will be accessible for everybody. And what we need is more supplies or more bikes for that, or roller skates or skateboards. All wheels will definitely do for us.
Wow, so that was our show for the month. Thank you to everyone who's watching, and most importantly, thank you to our participants, our interviewees, and all of our friends who made this possible. Thank you to our partners and our sponsors, and a special shout out to our friends at Truist who helped make this a reality. I'm excited to see everybody next month for our February web show on 2/24 at 6 p.m. right here on the Charlotte Pride social media. Tell your friends and tune in to have socially distant virtual watch parties. Send us your selfies, and we might share them on the page. As we wrap up tonight and return to our lives in quarantine, remember that you are valued and that you as a queer person cannot advocate for LGBTQ equity and equality without advocating for yourself. So we must remember that taking care of us and taking care of our community also means taking care of ourselves. We hope you enjoy, and we'll see you again next month.